A couple of final things to discuss when it comes to Leviticus is this idea of discharge and life force. And so why is it such a big deal to the authors of Leviticus that people not come near God if they're on their period, or if they've had a nocturnal emission, or if they have some sort of an STD or something? Why is that such a big deal? And so what I'm going to tell you is that in the ancient world and for the ancient Israelites, they thought of a pure body as one that was keeping all of its fluids inside of it. So there's not like an open wound, or you're not leaking anything anywhere, because whatever liquid stuff might come out of you, that to them was life force. So all of that blood and that semen and pus and stuff that you have inside of you is keeping you alive. And so if you are leaking life force, then you're moving towards death. And so you should not approach God if you're moving towards death. Remember, we already mentioned that when you live with God in your midst, when you're in this camp and when God is here and you're encamped all around God, then the source of all light, or all life rather, is in your midst. And you can only go near God if you're full of life. If death-like things and mundane things are starting to get you, so that you're leaking life force, then you cannot go near God, because God is life. And so you're transgressing this boundary between life and death if you're seeping some sort of life force. And that's why you can't go near God if you've had a nocturnal emission or if you're on your period, because you're losing life force. You're moving towards death. You can only approach God if your body is fully intact, if all of your cuts are healed and you're not seeping anything anywhere. Again, this is kind of a cultural and historical standard that maybe doesn't need to apply today, but it is something that they took very seriously. All right, let's see what we have next. So sacrifice, because God knows that if you're living in the camp, that the mundane or the movement towards death is going to get you. It's going to seep in on you. And so the way that you can restore your purity is by shedding blood, by dumping out all of the life of an animal. When you kill the animal, you have to shed all of its blood, and all of that blood will function to purify you, to purify the camp, to purify the people in it. It restores order. It brings things back to life. The full giving of life of an animal restores life in the camp, and killing something else brings life to those in the camp, because that life is poured out completely, and so it is effective to bring life where death had been seeping in. Also, you don't just kill the animal, but you also eat it. And so it nourishes you, the animal, so here you are at the temple, you wash the animal and then you offer it up to Yahweh, and then you eat it. And so that animal who's given its life completely also nourishes you and brings life in you. And at the heart of all of this, it seems like at the heart of sacrifice in general is some deep understanding that the people of God had, that in order for us to maintain life, in order for humans to keep on living, something else has to die to nourish us. And so somehow they understood that by killing an animal and by eating that animal, you sustain your own life, or by killing grains, you sustain your own life, that sort of thing. And so there's this strange relationship between death and life. Death to one thing brings life to another. And that seems to be what is at the heart of sacrifice. Now, it's not only sacrifice that you need if you are going to keep life in your camp, but you need to keep your time, your calendar focused on Yahweh as well, because there's a continual maintenance as the mundane and as death seeps into your camp. There's this continual maintenance to bring life again. And so, you have to focus on Jubilee to reorder your relationships with one another. You need to focus on Sabbath to remember your relationship with Yahweh, that you're focused completely on Yahweh one day of the week. And this continual maintenance and this going through these seasons, going through different feast times and different fasting times is reminding you that you are setting things back to right within the camp. It's this continual maintenance of looking at the camp and examining, okay, are people acting the way they should towards one another? Are people acting the way they should towards God? Is there anything that we need to set back to right again? So these things are all very important. All of this purity, your relationships with one another, and following the calendar is also very important. So the takeaway from Leviticus, even though it's really weird and there's some weird stuff in there about things that you could wear and things that you can eat and whether or not you can go near God while you're on your period, still it points to something that I think is really important, and that is if God is going to live among us for the people of God, then everything has to change. This touches every part of our lives. This touches what we eat, what we wear, how we interact with others, and how we interact with God, and it affects our calendar. So all of life has to be oriented around God's ways. God is doing something completely new at Mount Sinai. God is living among God's people. And so God is creating sacred space and sacred time so that people can live with God in their midst. And everything has to change then. All right, so that's Leviticus for you. And I hope you enjoyed it. I sure did.